Okay. All right, we're off and running. Thank you very much. And today, as I should introduce myself. My name is Mike Southern, and for those of you that have been here for the last few months, we've been doing these free demonstrations using various materials. We've done watercolor, acrylics, and now we're into a section on oil painting. And this is the sixth one of, seventh one of 8, I think. Anyway, we've got 2 more left, whatever number we're on. And the next 2 weeks, we're going to be working on this one painting. So this will be a 2-parter. So today I will get us started, sort of talk a little bit about composition and how to arrange things on your canvas or board or paper, or whatever you're painting on. And then we'll get into the more detailed bits of the painting next week, or yes, next week, a week from now, same time, same place. And so let's get started with just getting right into the materials here. There's a fair amount of stuff I want to cover, but first, materials. And as I've been saying all along, this list is basically just a starting point. It's not, if you don't have some things or if you have more things, you certainly can supplement this and substitute things out. You know, you want some white, you want some black, you want your 3 primaries. I've listed cadmium red and cadmium yellow as the 2 warm primaries, and then ultramarine blue as the cool primary. But if you've got others that are sort of in that general ballpark of a bright red, a bright yellow, and a bright blue, you're going to be fine. I've also got a couple of earth tones, yellow ochre and raw umber. Sienna is another good one. There's all sorts of lovely earth tone colors out there. So the more the merrier, although I do like to keep my palette fairly simple. But if you've got some tubes of paint that have, been mixed up, that are secondaries like greens and purples and things like that, those work fine as well. So that's the basics of the paint. Brushes, just a wide range of rounds, of flats, and filberts are sort of a particular favorite of mine because they're pretty versatile. All sizes are going to be useful for a painting like this. So, don't feel you've got to have smaller brushes or bigger brushes. A mix is great. And I use a medium called Liquin, which is a Winsor Newton product. And it basically just makes your paint a little more fluid, behaves more like ink. And especially in the beginning stages, I'm going to use that a fair amount to sort of block things in. So let's see, anything else that I missed? That pretty much covers it. Okay, so what we are going to work on is we are going to work on a still life. And I have spent a little bit of time setting something up, getting a few different ideas down, but this is what I have come up with. Now, there's a lot going on here. It's pretty complicated in terms of a lot of pattern and stuff like that, but I'm going to make this hopefully as easy as possible to follow. I'm going to keep things very simple today. And then next week, I'll try to get into some of the more, intricate little patterny passages in this painting. If you find it easier to work from a bigger version of this, if you want to take a screenshot of this now on your computer or your phone, if you have the capability to do that, that'd be great. I will have it posted up in the corner. It is fairly small. So I'll just talk a little bit here. And as I'm doing that, if you just want to take a picture of that and maybe blow it up on your screen and work from a little bit bigger copy, that might be a good way to go. That's what I'm going to be doing. I've got another print of this in a JPEG that I'll just have on my screen as I'm working. So I like to have that. And plus my eyes are terrible, so bigger the better. Okay, so that is our still life for today. I purposely chose, like I said, sort of a lot of pattern, a lot of sort of intricacy and detail, but I also chose a palette of colors that are really pretty subtle. There's a lot of really light tones here. So I'm really going to get into mixing a lot of what are called tints which means it's sort of a lighter version of the root color, like, a tint of red would be more of a pinkish color, something like that. So we'll get into a lot of that color mixing stuff on this one as well. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about how we're going to map this out. And with this little slide, this little picture, I've kind of gridded things out into thirds. And this is a good general compositional thing you can do to, if you don't really know where to start, if you don't know, how balanced or unbalanced your painting is, just putting or your composition is, just putting a little grid over the top of it. And all I did was, with these red lines, is I just sort of drew on the original JPEG and just left them on there, sort of made a duplicate of it. And then I'm able to kind of, see how things are arranged on the page a little bit more easily. And this will also help if you're going to transfer from the photograph onto your piece of canvas or board. So this is something that I find to be really helpful. The rule of thirds is sort of an old compositional device that a lot of artists used to get things organized in a way that works visually, that's striking visually, that sort of draws you in to the composition. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as I get things down on paper. Although I am not going to work on paper, and where did it go? There we go. Hold on one second. This doesn't take more than a second. So you can see in the upper corner there, I've got the slide, so you can kind of use that as a guide as to whether that's too big or too small for you. Here it comes now. There we go. It's a little bit cockeyed. Come on. Let's try that again. Sorry about that. It's Technical Fun Day. Come on. It's not behaving itself. All right. Let's try it again. There we go. All right, we're back. It just wants to look outside and see the birds. There we go. That's better. Sorry about that. Okay, so what I have here, I'm going to be painting on a sheet of plywood. You can see I've prepared it, put a nice kind of ochre ground on it here to kind of get rid of the bright white. But you can see that this is just a regular piece of plywood. I love working on wood. It's very, very rigid. The surface can be as rough or as smooth as you're comfortable with. I've made this one particularly smooth. And the way I did that was as I actually applied it with like a kind of a drywall scraper, like a big palette knife, essentially, sort of a big version of this. And I just scrape the gesso across when I'm putting it on, and it gets it really smooth. And then I sand it. I'm not going to go through all that. You're just going to have to trust me that that's how it works. But if you just paint gesso on, let it dry, sand it down, put another coat on, sand it down again, that'll probably get you in the neighborhood of a nice smooth surface. I like to use about 220 to about 400 grit sandpaper to really, if I really wanted to get it smooth. But if you use 150 or something like that, that works fine as well. If you're using canvas or if you're using paper that's been gessoed, those will also work perfectly fine. This is by no means a requirement to make this work. But I just wanted to do this because I've mostly worked on canvas, and so I wanted to try something a little bit different. Okay, so we've got our grid, we've got our picture, and I'm going to start transferring this onto here. And I think the way that I'm going to do it initially really kind of in a basic way with just a little pencil here. So the first thing I'm going to do, everything artistically, visually that you can do that simplifies information, the better. So in other words, the last place I would want to start is like down in that little tea kettle and try to get the spout, all that, and to draw the intricate little blue adornments on there. So I'm just going to try and use this basically this white box that you see that kind of frames all this stuff. And I'm just going to get all of that information down here really easily. And normally with an hour-long one, I don't have enough time to do this, but I really wanted to show you kind of how things get built up in the initial stages. I'm just using a colored pencil. You can use just a regular number 2 pencil, or you could even paint this if you wanted to. So I'm just, and if you had the gridded picture of this, this would, because I've gridded things out, you can kind of see all the vertical and horizontal lines. This would be a good way to use that. So right now I'm just trying to find the envelope, so to speak, of the basic composition here. And looking for kind of big lines. I haven't gotten into that little iron tea kettle, which I'm really excited to do, even though it's kind of the crux of the whole thing. I haven't even gotten there yet because I'm trying to stick with kind of the big elements. This up here kind of gets me from one end of the page to another. This gets me down to the bottom. This gets me down to the bottom. This gets me over here to the side. So I'm really trying to strategically get myself organized here, big to small, general to specific. And so a pepper over here, I could spend 20 minutes drawing a pepper, but I'm going to spend about 10 seconds just getting the basics of it kind of worked in here. These initial stages are not designed to spend a half a day doing this drawing. I do not like to spend a lot of time on this stage of a painting. I just want to make sure that I've got the composition that I want, and then I'm gonna move on. Like this would be, oh, I could draw this all day. It's so interesting and intricate, but it's not really time well spent, honestly. It is a painting after all. Drawing in this case is a very important part of that puzzle. So I'm just trying to get the general gist of things. These kind of nice little swooping lines here kind of connect one end into the kettle, across the page. Really trying to, relate things to each other. There we go. And as always, I know I always usually mention this, but I forgot to mention it today. If you've got questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I can get those relayed to me, and we can sort of troubleshoot some of the things, some of the issues you might be having. Teacup. Just trying to see where this goes. No. There's our teacup. A little ellipse. You want to get good at drawing? Practice ellipse. The ellipses, these little sort of sideways circles. Really basic shape, but something that you'll do over and over again. Okay. Stir the cream in your coffee, whatever you're cooking there. Little egg hiding behind there. Anybody see the egg? I forgot about the egg, honestly. So this is a slightly elevated view, meaning I'm looking down at these objects. And so you're going to get a lot of interesting perspective issues that you're doing here. Like I'm looking at this tea kettle, and it's pretty far below where my point of view is. So getting these ellipses right will sit the objects down in space pretty nicely. So just be aware of how high you are, and especially if you're sort of working from your own still life or drawing something in your own space. Understanding the perspective from where you're seeing all of these objects is really important. So this ellipse and this ellipse, since these things are sort of on the same general plane towards the bottom, I'm looking down into both of them. They should be fairly similar. And so this ellipse and this ellipse, even though they're smaller sizes, are going to have about the same general width to them. So I just want to keep an eye on that. Yeah.
We do have a question. Somebody said they are real confused about the lighting. There's
Yep.
shadows going in all directions.
Yes.
Especially the cup. So I don't know if you want to just explain a little bit about like where your light sources are, or you know.
Yep. Absolutely, that's a great question, and that's also an awesome thing to notice, because the light source is actually very consistent. What you're seeing down at the bottom, just below the cup, this little thing right here, I think I know exactly what you're talking about. What this is that's light coming through a sliding glass door, and it's a little slat, so it's casting a shadow. So I did a few things like that too to kind of throw things off. I like this as a little compositional piece, so I put it in there. Basically, this is a continuation of that little shadow. So you picked on up on something really good and really subtle, but it is something that, you know, this being sort of a longer, more ambitious type painting, I wanted to kind of approach that. So yeah, thanks for noticing that. That was a good pickup. I was going to get into that when I started doing value, but we're pretty much there anyway, so that works good. So the source of light is predominantly coming from this side and casting shadows this way across. So in here, you can see this is pretty much all in shadow with a little highlight right here. This is pretty well lit up with a shadow, you know, behind there. So if you want to keep that in your mind as you're doing this, this little shadow down here in the corner is also something that is cast from the outside and sitting across it. When you see like really, you know, really detailed, crazy still life stuff, you'll often have, you know, you'll see the artists do kind of funny things with light. Like sometimes they might put it from below to kind of cast weird shadows. They might also do it like I've done here, where there's something that you can't see outside of the picture casting a shadow onto it. So there's a little bit of that going on here for sure. And all I'm doing right now is I'm not coloring anything in. I'm just trying to kind of establish the basic, let's see how that goes, the basic position of all these things. Let's go with that. That's a shadow. That's the actual handle. What else we got here? Let's throw a couple of these in here just as reference. All right, I think from my standpoint, this is enough for me to go on. I think this needs to be a little bit wider. Just looking at that as an ellipse, since we were talking about this. This is raised up a little bit more. I think this needs to come down a little bit more. So this is another thing too, is, you know, just because I've got it down and it's here, it doesn't mean it's settled business. It should be a constant negotiation. You should always be looking, you should always be reevaluating. I see a lot of people in you know, when I used to teach beginning drawing or painting classes, they put something down and they feel compelled to keep it exactly the way it is. Don't. It is part of a moving dynamic of a painting. So you've got to be willing to change it. You've got to be willing to erase it and get rid of it if it's not working, if it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. So, you know, always be willing to kind of scuff things out and start from scratch if need be. This is a lovely and ornate little thing. I'll try and get the basics of that down. There's a little symmetry here. These two are essentially mirror images of each other. So that's not a mirror image of each other. Symmetry is a pain in the neck sometimes. It looks easy, but it's not. Let's see. And this is a water-based thing, so I can just rub it out. I like this one a little better. And this thing, if you notice, is slightly slanted. You know, these are fairly flat, and then these kind of go at a diagonal. So that's also another funky little thing. I notice here that this is probably a little bit off. So I think that's going to help with the old symmetry issue. Oh, that's a little better. I don't know if 2 hours is going to be enough to get that symmetry perfect, but I'll see what I can do. Okay. I think that I'm going to have to live with this because I do want to get into the kind of the intricacies of blocking this in. See, this is the, you can see me kind of getting sucked into this little drawing problem. It's like, oh, I got to get that right. But you can always adjust things on the fly as you're painting. That's a little bit better. Let me see how it looks on that screen. Yeah, I see a little bit of symmetry happening there. But that is definitely, you know, that is definitely going to be kind of a complicated shape. So we'll see how this goes. Okay, so now I'm going to get started with the paints. Right here, I've got my paints that I had last week for our portrait, and I'm just going to use those and supplement more paint as I need it. I'm a big believer in just sort of, you know, recycling what you can and, you know, getting as much mileage out of your material. So I'm just going to take my little palette knife here. That's a little bit sticky, but still good. There's a lot of people that sort of believe in just sort of getting rid of all their paint that they use each day and starting fresh. I'm not one of those people, but you can do it either way. I mean, I could have just as easily gotten rid of all this paint and started fresh. That's not very good. All right, the rest of this is kind of useless, so I'm going to have to go and complement. I think I'm going to stick with a fairly limited palette in the beginning here. I'm going to use a little burnt raw umber, excuse me, as kind of my predominant dark, and I'm going to use a little bit of the blue. I have cerulean blue hue, but I've got ultramarine blue listed, so I've more or less got everything. I don't think I'm going to get into too much red, and as soon as I say that, I know I'll end up using red, so I'll just go ahead and skip to that part where I decide that I actually need red and put it down here first. Let's just do that. And you can see there's no rhyme or reason to the way I'm putting things out here. It's more so that you can see everything. You know, some people are very much, you know, like they'll do it in terms of value. Like they'll have white, yellow, ochre, maybe red, and then blue, and then the brown and black, something like that. I've sort of got it around the bend with white in the center there. But really, I've never found it to be a prevailing, you've got to do it exactly this way every time. It's just one of those things that, you know, people do out of personal preference more than anything else. So I got my rag here. I'm going to keep this handy for stuff like this. I'm going to start just by doing kind of a little sketch, a little block-in sketch here in primarily the raw umber, and I've got my medium here. If you've got, you know, terpenoid or one of those odorless thinners, you can use that. I'm just going to use the medium because I don't like to, this is my sort of living space. If I had a full studio where I was doing this, I might be a little bit more, brazen with my use of solvents, but for the time being, I'm going to stick with this. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm basically just going to reiterate a little bit of the drawing. And so I'm using a nice round brush. This is a size 7, sort of a mid-size round. Basically treating it almost like a pen, because it's got a nice flow to it. I'm just going to block in areas here, get sort of a general lay of the land. Nothing terribly detailed at this stage, obviously. This is just about the preliminaries and just trying to get that drawing kind of boxed in. And see, I put a little bit more medium in this one, so it's flowing a little bit more. It's got a little bit more of a kind of a script quality to it. I can just sort of block that in because that's going to be nice and dark. Nice sharp edge over here. Comes down and then dips out of the side. Let's see where. Just above the cup. And then see, I'm looking at the picture up in the corner there, and I'm seeing where this if I were to take this all the way across, where it intersects that. It's just above. This goes off the page, just above the teacup. So I've about got that right. So you can use that grid as kind of a reference to the drawing and the composition, kind of bleed things in, make them make a little bit more sense. This is kind of a nice dark shape here that I'm going to try and establish. Just ever so lightly. It's not so much that I'm actually trying to color anything in here. I'm just trying to block in a general value read on how these shadows play across the different objects. This is a little bit over there. Lots of folds in here. I'm just kind of scrubbing it in more than anything else. Nothing detailed, not trying to get really any sense of texture or anything like that. This is just a value lay-in at this stage, just trying to establish those strong shadow shapes. I'm just going to come around and pop anything in here that strikes my fancy. That comes down. This one comes down. How's everybody doing? Anybody have any issues, any questions, any problems?
We do have a question about which color you are using.
Yeah, this one right here. This is raw umber, but you can basically use anything that's got some sense of darkness to it. If you wanted to start with blue, that's totally fine. There's no hard and fast rule about this. This is more, I would say, a kind of a classical approach. A lot of sort of older painters, Renaissance, Baroque era painters would have used this color. But I mean, I know a lot of contemporary painters that start, with sort of more neutral browns and earth tones. But I just like raw umber because it integrates itself well into other colors. Like if you started with a blue, for instance, and then you came over top of it and it was still wet with maybe yellow or something else, it's much more likely to kind of contaminates, maybe not the right word, but change that color pretty dramatically. So I like to use raw umber because it's kind of soft, it's kind of mellow, but it also can get me fairly dark fairly quickly. So I've got a lot of flexibility with how to use it. But like I said, this stage is really just all about blocking in big general shapes. All right, let's see what else we got here. What else am I missing? Oh, this is a nice big dark triangle here. And you know, that brings up an interesting point about, you know, how to identify these things. A lot of people get overwhelmed by how busy things can be in a painting, whether it's, you know, a figure or a still life or landscape or whatever. Just try and think of everything as the most basic shape that you see. Like this little thing that I'm drawing right here, that I'm painting, that I'm blocking in, is basically just a big triangle. It's like a big dunce cap. So, you know, it's not like, oh, it comes down and then it wiggles a little bit here. It's, for now, it's a big triangle. Keep it simple. You can make this as complex or as simple as you want down the road, but at this stage of a painting, it's a really good, at the block end stage, it's just a really good idea to keep things as basic and as simple as you possibly can. Having a nice, easy strategy and approach is going to save you a lot of headaches. You know, most people left to their own devices would probably still be fiddling around with here or doing this or whatever. You want to be moving all over the page. Get as much of that information down in a general sense as you can. Let's just do a couple of these just to lay them in. Nice little shadow there. That little shadow there. Kind of open that up a little bit more. All right, what else we got here? Some nice little moving around. We're sort of concentrating on this area a little bit. Now it's time to move over here a little. Maybe get that blocked in. There's a little shadow up over here. That's another one of those cast shadows from kind of outside the picture, which might be a little bit confusing. Let's lay in a couple of these little ridges here. Here's a nice one. And this is where a brush like this is great. It's you know, it's kind of like just a big, what's called a hake brush, you know, an ink brush. It just really flows. So you can get a lot of nice, subtle variations in tone, you know, by pressing harder, a little bit softer, it can be a little darker, a little lighter. And it really holds the shape that you're trying to draw well. I'm just maybe adding a little bit of darkness here.
Another question here, Mike.
Yep.
Someone's shadow is too dark. How do they fix it?
Well, it's oil paint, so you're in luck, because all you have to do is just take a rag and kind of rub it out a little bit. You know, paper towel, anything, even a brush with a little bit of medium on it, you can kind of add to it and it'll sort of loosen it up and you can kind of lessen it that way. So, but basically just work reductively by going in with a rag or even a dry brush and just kind of taking some of that paint out.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for those of you that have done acrylics before and maybe are new to oils, this to me is the great advantage of oils. Like if you're trying to get a fairly precise read on things, oftentimes with acrylic, you know, it dries so fast that you've got to, you know, you're almost rushing to get things down before it dries. With this is going to be open for hours, so I can just fiddle, go have a, you know, ham sandwich or whatever, and then come back and I'm good to go. It's still wet, it's still open, and I can really, you know, take my time with it. Great advantage of oils. I am going to just hint at some of this. Just a little bit. As tempting as it would be, kind of butt into each other like that. To obsess about this. paint it down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, good. If in doubt, count. There is math sometimes in painting. Sometimes. I try to keep it to a minimum. My daughter is doing pre-calculus right now, and she comes up to me, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you're talking to the wrong person. It's not my area of expertise. You want to know how to mix a good green? Come see me. But pre-calc, not me. Okay.
So this isn't so much a question, but somebody has said, I like your approach. It provides an emphasis on the items you'll be developing the detail on later, which I think is exactly what you're doing. And that's fantastic, right? You get a big feel and then you go down to the details later.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, you don't want to spend all your time doing this in the first half hour and then you realize, oh wow, that's like 20% too big, or too small, or whatever. You get the composition, you get the basic shapes, and then you can come into this. This is not right. This is not going to be exactly where I'm going to be with this, but it gives me an idea of where I'm going to go with it. So you're really just trying to kind of establish an overall kind of feel for the composition. I'll just do a little bit of this. There it is. So yeah, thanks for that. That's awful kind of you. All right, what else we got? All right, I think I want to start blocking in some color. So I think this is a fairly good starting point here. Let's have a look. Yeah, that works. Okay, good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start laying in some color, and primarily what my job here is to figure out, as to prioritize things. And the priority color wise for me at this stage is this white is everywhere. So I'm going to try and mix up this white. And obviously, white is not monolithic, meaning it's not all the same color. I would describe this as a warm white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some white, some just titanium white, and I'm going to take a little bit of yellow ochre, and what else? See anything else? Maybe a little bit of this brighter, like sort of more of a lemon yellow. So nothing terribly exotic. And I'm going to need more white because there's a lot of it here. So I'm just going to get some more out. Some of the titanium. And since I'm going to be bringing it over here anyway, I'm going to put it right about there. And maybe get a little bit more of those warmer colors. Just a touch, just to warm it up. All right. And I think in the initial stages here, I'm gonna work fairly thinly. And that's a good general rule of painting anyway. Fat over lean, as they call it. So like the heavier, thicker passages over thinner passages. I mean, that's a simplification of it, but that's basically what's going on here. So I'm just going to take a fair amount of medium with this warm white, and I can always make it a little warmer just by adding a little bit more color in there. I picked up, looks like some raw umber in there. It's not the end of the world. Raw umber is not predominantly warm or predominantly cool. It's just kind of mid hue. Okay, so I'm just going to start laying in the general outline here. and really trying to keep it just to those strong highlights. Not worrying, not trying to get in here just yet. But just blocking, once again, blocking things in. Now, instead of value, I'm trying to be a little bit more assertive with the color. So adding, I don't know, I would say maybe this is like 20% medium, 80% pigment. So I'm using medium, but I'm not overwhelming it. And again, I'm using the round here because it allows me to kind of get into detail, but also if I flatten it out, I can kind of get, I can get a lot of coverage just by pressing down a little bit more. So it's pretty versatile. You could use a flat for this as well. I mean, whenever you're covering a fair amount of space like I am, obviously you want to use as big a brush as you can get. And, if you sort of scrub into something and it's not, not exactly perfect or whatever, that's not really the goal here. We're not in the stage where we're trying to clean things up. We're just blocking in. So I'm just being fairly rough with it. Maybe trying to define this shape a little bit more. There we go. So again, keeping things relatively simple, relatively basic. There we go. Okay. And there's going to be a lot of colors like this white that I'm mixing, meaning they're not, this isn't yellow, it's not white, it's sort of slightly in between. It's sort of there's a lot of sort of half hues, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So there's going to be a fair amount of color mixing that's going on here. That's another thing I really wanted to explore in this one, especially when we get into that and some of these, these more subtle objects. It's almost more of a tonal painting. I started there thinking it was part of it, but that's actually a different towel. So I'll leave that alone. Let's go. All right. So really almost at this stage, just doing a kind of a negative of the composition. So it's the darks and the lights at this stage, not really trying to do much more than that. And so once I've got the white and once I've got the brown, I can maybe go in and start to, like in here, there's a little bit of the dark that I've missed or, kind of underestimated or overestimated. And so I'll just come in here and kind of refine a little bit of that. And here's that funky
Mike, we've got another question. How are you avoiding the raw umber as you're going over with the white?
I'm being very careful. I'm actually not avoiding. I've bumped into it a few times. So like right here, can everybody see that? Let me just move it up a little bit so you can see a little better. And I'll just maybe do a close-up. Let's do this. So in this particular area down here, I want to define that the spout here. So I'm just going to go right into it and I'm kind of pushing it out of the way. So, you can bully those pieces of paint, because everything right here is very thin. There's not a lot of paint that we're using. So, it's fairly easy to get rid of stuff or to kind of subvert it back into the overall design just by kind of pushing it around. So I use a little bit of a heavier white here. And I was able to just kind of get rid of that. And it just sort of, if you look right along here, it kind of integrated. It's sort of a slightly smeary bit, but it's not that noticeable. So you can get away with a fair amount by just, especially at this stage. It's when we get later on in the painting and things are a little bit more established and the paint is a little thicker and you've kind of invested, that becomes more of an issue later on. In these beginning stages, you can often get away with just kind of pushing things around a little bit. But I am, for the most part, trying to avoid, I don't want to go scraping into here like that. But it's also not the end of the world. I mean, you can see I got a little bit in there, but it pretty quickly, because it's so thin up there, it just kind of loses any kind of prominence. Kind of squirreling around here. Let's go back out. Okay. And just finishing in the block over here. There's all this texture in this blanket that I'm painting at the moment, which I am not, even though we do have 2 sessions, going to have the time to go and investigate fully. But I may do some, basic sort of little textural things to get the hint that this is not like a flat satin sheet. This is, got a little texture to it. It's got a little bit of fabric to it.
Okay, so we now have someone saying, you always seem to be able to paint without reloading your brush often. I have to reload more often. What am I doing wrong?
You probably should use a little bit more medium or a little bit more mineral spirits if you're using mineral spirits instead of medium. That extends the paint. It just makes it flow easier. So that I would say almost positively is what's going on with your case. If you're doing it and it's really kind of holding the surface. I'm also using a really smooth board, so that makes it flow a little bit better. So you might, I don't know if you're working on canvas or what your surface is, but that'll have something to do with how it flows on the page. So it just might be a situation where, our materials are different enough that they behave, in kind of diametrically opposed ways. All right, so now I'm going to block in this. This is a different white, but for now, this is going to be fine. I'm just going to put in, sort of the overall general read of values. Okay, let's see how that looks. I got to get a little wider view there. All right, darks and lights. That seems pretty good. And you can see it's really basic. It's, I've basically done no detail to speak of, just big white areas, big dark areas for shadows, and that's about it. So I'm just going to go back. I'm going to keep this white brush handy because I'll probably go back and use it. I'm going to use a smaller round. This one here, this is a size 3. This is that Artist Loft, 24 brushes for like, I don't know, 10 or 15 bucks or whatever it is. I've been using these for a while and they're doing a perfectly fine job. So I've got no issues with them. I'm not expecting them to last forever because, you do get what you pay for. But if if you clean them well, any brush will last for a while. And these have a really good feel to them. I actually like, some of the cheaper brushes I've used. They can be a little bit, they just feel like you got to work a little bit too hard to get the marks. but these are actually doing pretty well. Okay, so let me see here. Let me just do.
Mike, what is the medium that you're using again?
Yeah, it's this right here. And I actually use Liquin, which is a Winsor Newton product. It's just called Liquin Original, I think. And then I mix it with linseed oil, which is basically how you make oil paints. So, but you can use straight Liquin if you want. I just like to kind of cut it a little bit. It gives me a little bit more of a drying time. It has a little bit more length to it, meaning it's not going to get tacky within, a few hours. It's going to stay open for most of the day. All right, so now I'm just kind of coming back and just adding another degree of value to this. Let me get that a little further over. Go. Okay. We're gonna have a lot of work to do next week. That's okay. Let's see.
So we have a follow-up question for that. Is it a 50-50 ratio of the Liquin and linseed oil that you're using?
Yep, that's pretty much what I use. And if you want it to dry a little bit quicker, you just add more Liquin. If you want it to dry a little slower, more linseed oil.
Fantastic. And we did say have someone asking if you could list the different mediums that one could use. I'm happy to pop it in the chat, just like terpenoid, linseed oil.
Yep.
So I'll go ahead and do that.
Liquin, there's stuff called a Gamblin product. What's it called? I think it's called, well, Gamsol is their solvent. And I mentioned Gamblin because I used to live in Portland, and they're based in Portland. So, but they're nationwide. You can get them at Michael's. You can get them at any art supply store. They're really easy to find. All right. So one thing I'm going to do now here, and maybe is start to create a little bit of what I would call halftones. So I've got lights and I've got darks. And then there's some areas here, and I got to be pretty careful about this, like right in here where it's, here's the dark. Let me just reiterate that dark. Well, really dark right there. And then as I get closer to it, it kind of creates this sort of halftone. So I can go back and forth with kind of white. So if you see a situation like an edge like that, where it's sort of the shadow is creeping into the highlight and vice versa, you can get a little bit of that tonal variation. So we start working our way into a little more subtle use of color and things. And I'm just gonna, just because we've got a tiny bit of time left, I'm just gonna block in the brightest element here. And I'm probably gonna work on this a little bit outside of class here. And I would encourage you, if you wanna continue with this, just to kind of do what I'm doing. Just, this is really the only brightly colored object in the whole thing. And I'm just taking, it's pretty much straight red out of the tube. And I can always adjust the color later. But for now, I just want to block it in, and that it can often be kind of a nice counterpoint to all this sort of dull color that we're using right now, and give you a little bit of a read on how brighter, more intense, saturated colors are going to read. So I'm not trying to be terribly sophisticated with the color, really, or the shape, to be honest. I can always come back and kind of modify it a little bit, but I just want to get it down and see how it looks. And while I've got this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and mix up a color for that egg. That egg is sort of a nice little sort of in between color. So maybe what I'll do here, I'll just scrape this off, and then we'll end and maybe see how people are going. So I'm going to mix up the egg color really quick here. So I'm going to take this. I got a little bit of red left over on here. Take some of this yellow ochre. So it's kind of an orange, and then I'm just going to kill it with this white and make kind of a tint, which is whenever you tint something, you add white to it. It's an actual real term. So that looks eggy. Yeah, I like it. Let's get a close up on the egg. There we go. So yeah, that color. So you saw what I did there is I just created a kind of a warm, slightly orange. There was just a twinge or a tinge of red already on my brush. And then I just added a fair amount of yellow ochre and then just added a ton of white to kind of get the tone right. So this is what I'm going to do here in the next few minutes beyond our time, is I'm just going to try and pop this in. This is going to be mostly white, something that's really complicated like this. I'll just do this really quick because that's something you should see. I'll just take this and I'm ignoring all of the, intricacy. I'm just going to block it in like that. Not even worrying about that little nozzle there. You can go around it if you want, but something that's really complicated like that now becomes something really simple. And then all of that detail is going to come in later next week when we let this dry. So that's how I would do, really probably the most complicated in terms of the detail that we're going to end up doing. That's about what the max would be of an object like that for this week. And then I'm gonna let that dry. So your goal here, if you've got a picture of the still life, maybe I'll put it up at the very end. But let's have a quick look. So here, I'll put it up. If people want to get a quick shot of that so they can work from it and just block in those colors, if you want to do a screenshot or even take a picture on your camera or whatever works for you. But if we maybe go back and if people want to maybe show that, hold their work up, do a little show and tell, we can have a little look-see and see how people did today. Remember, the goal today is just to get the general relationship, just sort of hold it up, give us a read on things. And maybe Ash, are you able to spotlight individual people?
Yep, I'm going through right now.
Oh, cool. Awesome. All right, John Williams. Nice. It looks like you did your own. Nicely done. Way to keep it fresh and real with your own objects. Very good. Oh, good drawing. So you spent a little bit more time on the drawing there, Allie, it looks like. Great. So you're ready to lay in those colors? Yeah, good. Patty S, same thing. Excellent. And Denise, yeah, there you go. All right. You're starting to get the lay of the land in there with some of those big color shapes. Yeah, that looks great, Cindy. Excellent. Yeah, keeping it simple right now. And Judy, yep, good. That looks awesome. Henrietta, I'm seeing some names that I'm getting familiar with. Lonnie, yep, that looks great. Excellent. And just go back and forth with those lights and darks. Make sure you get that up there. And Carol, that looks great. Keeping it nice and basic. Oh, there you go. Oh, you just did a drawing. That looks great. That's another thing you can do. You can do a much more detailed drawing and then work from that as your source material. Yeah, Jennifer, excellent. Nice sort of more subtle shadows there behind that that big tea kettle. Excellent.
I think we got everybody.
Great. All right. Well, we only went a couple minutes over time. Well, thank you all, folks, and we will continue with this next week. So, you know, I'd urge you to kind of play around with this a little bit more and sort of block some of those bigger shapes in. And then when we meet back, we'll get into the nitty gritty of more detailed work. Okay. Thanks very much, folks. See you next week. Have a good week. Take care.